Okay, let the minutes reflect that we have a quorum. In fact, all of our members are present. And I think we start with, do we do a moment of silence? We'll start with a moment of silence. Okay, and now if the members will please rise to say the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
See, I think the first we need to ask if there are any revisions to the agenda for today.
I have one item. I want to add the topic of legal to executive session.
I don't think we can, do we have outside counsel coming?
I think we're
I've-
trying to arrange it.
Oh, okay.
Are we? Because I failed, I
Oh,
kind
I
of
think
forgot
we-
to try.
Okay. If we're not able to get him, then we can pull that. or not do that.
Do you think you could text him?
Sure, you do want him to come?
I think it'd be good.
Okay, yeah. All right.
Okay, so the agenda will, with the addition of legal to the executive session. Minutes, the minutes have been distributed to you from our last meeting, which was, I think, June, 18? Do we have any revisions to the minutes? Okay, so the minutes will be finalized as presented. Shocking. I thought I had the, did you have a packet? Next is public comment, because we don't have a spotlight today.
Correct. And we have no one signed up for public comment.
You have
Nothing
nothing to say?
to say? All right. Okay, next then will be the superintendent's comment.
I'll just take this opportunity now that Dr. Furman is officially on the job to introduce Maggie Furman again, and it's been great having her here, and she's already gotten up and going. So thanks, Maggie.
Welcome. Okay, so now I'm up, the chair's report. I don't have a report. I guess we'll move on.
Keep going.
Keep
You're doing
going.
good. You're
All
doing
right, strategic priorities.
We don't have an update this week. Dr. Huddleston had a family situation to take care of, so we don't have an update for us.
Okay, consent items. We have 3 items on the consent agenda: the personnel report, the school nutrition report, and financial reports. Do we have a motion to approve the consent items?
So moved.
Second?
All in favor say aye.
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 Chair votes aye, so the motion carries. And the consent items, I'm trying to find them so I can read them. Well, let's just read them like that. So we've approved the personnel report, the school nutrition report, and the financial reports. Next, informational reports.
We have no information reports this month.
Okay, on to action items. The first item is our approval of the millage rate for the fiscal year 2019. Dr. Duty?
So would you like to see the presentation again, or since we just did it at 6 p.m.?
We've seen it.
Everybody
I think
good?
we should skip that.
So we've had 3 hearings. We had one in June, we had one this morning, one this evening. So we have completed the requirements for the hearings, and so we ask that the board approve the final millage rate of 18.66 mils.
Move to approve the fiscal year 2019 millage rate of 18.66 mils.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Chair votes aye, so the motion carries. Did you want to mention your clever idea, or do you want to save that for later?
Save it.
He's got a really good idea.
Secrets between the two?
Sorry. Just wait for it.
The suspense.
The next item on the agenda is approval of the unstructured break time policy.
So in June, we brought forward the policy as listed listed there, if I could read it if you'd like. And as is our practice, we tabled it so that there would be a month of opportunity for folks to provide input if they wanted. I didn't receive any input. I didn't see any come to the board email address either. And so I would recommend that we approve the policy as it was tabled in June.
Move to approve the unstructured break time policy as tabled in June and listed in the agenda.
Second.
Okay, and for discussion, the only thing is that I was supposed to make a typographical correction, which is simply that it says break time, it's supposed to be a defined term, recess, so the recess is supposed to be enclosed in parentheses.
Gotcha, we'll fix that.
And that was it. Any other discussion? All right, so all in favor say aye.
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 All right, chair votes aye, so that motion carries. The next item is the board policy manual. David?
So, we discussed at the last meeting, where we are with our board policy manual, and I believe we decided that the ends policies that we've developed to this point, we would go ahead and adopt, and then go through the process like we will with any of our policies moving forward and do revisions as needed on a month-to-month basis, I believe was how we came out from that discussion. Is that accurate?
Okay, so do we have a motion then to approve the draft that was presented at the last meeting? I don't think it's presented here.
And I'll get it attached here. It did not get attached here, but it was presented at the last meeting.
My only question is that it seems like we approved the first chapter because the first chapter had included references to ends policies and the other ones. I don't remember whether we ever actually approved the first set. So does this enter that same world of being approved pending completion of the manual, or are we approving it to go ahead and make the amendments to the published policies?
I mean, we can approve the whole manual if that's what you mean, but the piece that we presented last time was only the ends policy section of that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I guess it doesn't create any problems.
If it were the other way around,
It would create
it would
problems.
create problems.
This doesn't
but
create problems.
We can approve the ends policy
I agree.
absent the others,
I
I
agree.
believe.
All right, good enough.
I will get that attached, but if we could do the vote on that, that would be great.
Are we
Okay,
being asked to do the whole?
Just the
Just
ends
just the
policies.
ends
Just the ends
policies.
policies.
Just the end policies.
Do we have clarification on exactly what's being approved right now? It's also not attached to last month's agenda, so we
Oh,
don't
it
have
wasn't
it.
attached there. Okay,
Did we
So
have,
I just,
I'll pull it up right now.
It's a little messy.
did we
just
have
wanna
some
make sure we have clarity.
comments too? I thought we had a few comments that were going to be incorporated from the last meeting.
You know, given that it's not in front of us, maybe it would be best to push this until next month.
That's fine.
I'd like to do that too.
That's fine.
Okay.
So we'll
Were
table
Were
this.
there some comments at the last meeting that we had on it? I don't think there were.
I
The last one, I feel like it was before.
I think it was the
Oh,
one before,
okay.
and then we
he
made some changes.
Oh, okay.
Changes to the last meeting,
Yeah,
and then we were gonna table it for.
I did some
Okay.
grousing.
that's how I remember
That's
it
how I
as well.
remember it.
Well,
Okay.
the downside of tabling it for another month is that we're supposed to be working on the superintendent's goals for the next year.
But I
Well, but I
still
think-
think that shouldn't stop us from doing that.
I
We know
agree.
generally what it is, but
We-
I don't like voting on something and we don't have it in front of us.
I think we should use them for purposes of the goals.
Okay.
I think it's fine, because we know what it's gonna say. Like, it's not gonna be a surprise, so, and then we can also use that, because we're gonna be working on school improvement plans and district improvement plans, later this week. And so we'll just go ahead and work off that version of the ends, even if it's not approved, we'll know it's gonna be approved, so we can work from that.
Okay.
Can we still get everything attached to a board agenda item, just so that we have it there for
Yes.
reference?
Yes, we will.
Okay,
So move to table until the next regularly scheduled board meeting.
well, do we have to vote on table, just as a point of,
You can say if there's no objection, then we'll table it until.
there's no objection, we'll table it, thank you. All right. So the next item on the agenda is the 2019-2020 academic calendar. It's the final version of that calendar, and then the proposed or tentative version for the 2020-21.
And I'll
Right.
just share, this is, I think, the first on our board work plan, we have several annual items that we have went through and brainstormed of when should certain things happen. And we have decided that July is when these calendars should come, so I just want to point out that I think this is the first time that we've gotten to one of those annual planning things, and had a board item for it. So I think that's significant, and kudos to everybody for getting that calendar put together, so we make sure things get done on a schedule that we work with. So, Bruce, you want to just explain?
I'm excited that I get to be the first. Woo-hoo. You've already seen the first calendar, the 1920. It had, the only change we made was the spring break switch, because apparently the Metro agreement has spring break the same week as Masters Week. So we fixed that earlier. So this is just approving the draft that we've seen several times. The 2021 calendar follows the same pattern that the last two have followed. So school starts August 1 are attached. The breaks, the first semester ends before winter holiday break. We try to end the grading periods around the long week breaks, and then try to end before Memorial Day, but we're going over because we added those 3 days, the 183, so then we have no makeup days in the calendar.
So these calendars meet all those parameters
They
that we
meet all
put
those
together
parameters that we
through the
put
past
together.
process?
Right, we've used several times, and the past committees all went through those.
So, hold on, I have a couple questions. The 2000, maybe start with the 2019-20 calendar. So that we have one makeup day.
No, there are no makeup, there are 3 extra days added, so 183 days.
So it says, I see that on March 20th, looks like it's a makeup day.
I think it's
for
probably just
students.
a typo that we didn't clean it up.
I thought that, well, for
No, that's correct.
No, that's correct, I'm sorry.
That one is
Right.
correct.
That one is correct, so we left
'Cause
those
what we
in for
did is
next year.
We've built our goal is to build a 183 day, although sometimes it's not perfect, but the 183 days, so we have those 3 days built in no matter what. But then we still have some opportunities during
days.
the school year, if there's an extra day we really want to take, so we don't have to tack something on at the end, we still left some of
Yeah.
those in there. So
And I
that's what
misspoke,
that
they're
March
just not,
20
they're not in the long week breaks like they were, remember last year,
It's
we
not
had
part
them
of the,
listed
not part of the,
fall break
fall
and
break or the winter
winter
break.
break.
so,
So there's those teacher work days.
So, but the 2021 calendar does
Right.
not have any built-in makeup
Right, that's why
It
that's
does.
draft one, 'cause I haven't,
it does because
it has them there, just doesn't say break days.
so the difference, and this is, I think there's something a little confusing
Okay.
on the 2019-2020 calendar that's unlike the 2018-2019 calendar, which I printed out to kind of compare.
Right.
It's the key, like the clarification of the color coding
Right,
is different, and I think it's inconsistent with this year and 2020. And the difference is that the 2019-2020 calendar, if we could pull it up, it'd be helpful, shows red for makeup days and blue for teacher PL workday. But what we had decided to do earlier was combine those so that a teacher PL work makeup day was all the same.
Right.
And so it looks like the key is correct on 2021, but somehow maybe the older
when we
key got
cleaned it up
left.
on 1920, we cleaned it too well.
Yeah, so those, if those are combined to be
Right.
consistent with 2018, 2019, and also 2020,
Yeah.
2021,
So-
what it would do would be to indicate, I think, if it were to be consistent, that October 14th day would be
Right.
a teacher PL work
And the
makeup
March
day,
20 day.
and the March 20 day would
Right,
also
so
be.
the October day
That
just,
is
we
correct.
switched it from red to blue because the
Right.
November date is election day.
Well, right, and then that red color coding goes away because that combines
Right,
with the blue and becomes part of the blue.
Yeah.
So that was just
so
one,
that's just, as we were cleaning up the
yeah,
color coding,
I
we can
think
redo
that's,
that.
legacy from before we
Right.
changed that.
Yep, so to clarify, for the 1920 calendar, October 19th, or I can't read,
March.
October 14th
14th,
and March
March
20th
20.
would be the days that could be makeup days for students, potentially.
And
Right.
November 5th?
No,
What
that's
we don't
election
do,
day.
we don't touch Labor Day, Memorial Day, or Election Day as
Because we
potential
have
makeup
polling
days.
places still.
Right.
So, I guess this is a slightly separate but related issue in terms of our process for identifying makeup days. I thought part of, and maybe it's a separate committee, but at least I seem to recall that part of what we also wanted done was a process put together. And my only concern about this is there seems to be a suggestion in this that if we have to do makeup days, where the first ones we're gonna tag are professional learning days.
Not necessarily. I think it depends on kind of where things are, right? So let's say that we had a whole week of we can't have school in, September, and there was some water main break or something.
Right.
We may then say, okay, we've got to take that day in October, that's just too much, we can't take the risk because what might happen later in the school year.
Right.
But if that happened in, say, end of February, we may say, well, no, we're okay, we've got enough days, we missed 3,
But we have
we
3
don't
extras
necessarily
built
have to
We have
take
3
this,
extras
we've got 3 built in. So it'll be
Okay.
kind of a judgment call based on when it happens and kind of the extent of what's happening.
Okay.
More choice.
Our preference would be to never take the PL days because they are really important.
Right.
But we also have to recognize we may need to build in days, or we might get to the point and say, no, we don't want to take it, we're gonna add a day to the end of the year too, right? Or we're gonna wait and see until spring, maybe in February, let's revisit and say, maybe we do need to add some days at that point or something. Does that
Okay.
make sense?
I thought that there had been some discussion, and I'm not necessarily saying that we need to do this, but I thought that there had been some discussion about a committee or maybe someone on your staff, Dr. Judy, coming up with a sort of protocol about, at this point in the year, if we've missed X days, then we're going to do Y, but we have to make the call if we're going to cancel a professional learning day and students have to be in school, then we will not do that any less than 2 weeks in advance, or something along.
We did talk a little bit about
Okay.
that, and basically, while we haven't documented it in rules, that's exactly what our conversation was, like, how many weeks before a PL day
Right.
is acceptable notice to people to say, hey, we're gonna have to use that day. Your
Right.
kid has to come to school that day now, teachers, you can't do your PL now.
Right.
Whatever people were coming to do the PL would have to get canceled, things like that. We haven't documented that, but we can, of
Okay.
exactly how far in advance there. We tried to come up with some other rules, but as we started talking through scenarios, there's just so many different scenarios you can
Yeah.
run into. We decided that it's probably better to kind of, while having some rules of when you might use a PL day, in general, it's gonna have to just be a discussion based on what's happening in the moment, and
I wouldn't mind seeing at least some sort of guidance on it, maybe.
That's no problem. We can do that.
Not hard and fast rules, but generally, and maybe it just kind of needs to reflect some of our kind of mutual agreement that generally we like professional learning, we want to preserve those
Yep.
days where possible. We also believe in giving notice to families, that sort of thing.
well, and what we can do is we'll just write up an administrative regulation that lays out the parameters we use for the calendars, which we've already written all those down. And right in that, we can say, and here's some of the philosophical things
Yeah.
of makeup days, and that
Okay.
way it's at least written and we all can make sure we agree with it.
Okay.
That's no problem.
I have one more question about the 2019-2020 calendar. I was just curious, I noticed that the fall break was 1 week later than usual.
That's what the committee had asked for.
Okay, and I just thought that it's inconsistent with the year before and the year
It is.
after, and it's 7 weeks into the school
is,
year,
it's
so it
because
doesn't
the-
align with the marking
Because the
period?
numbers were, the weeks ended up being more. We had an odd one because of when school started and ended. So one ended up being 7. The
Oh,
committee
okay.
asked for that to be pushed back. That was the one they agreed to.
Why?
Who knows? They just thought that was a better idea for them, for teachers.
For doing, fall break, the
Grading,
last
fall
week of
break, the
September
last week of
instead of the
September.
third.
Cause, yeah, and I guess, I'm just noticing that it's been the third
Yeah.
week
I can revisit that with them
for
if you want to.
many years, and it's the third week this year, and it's the third week the year after,
Right.
and typically aligns with the 6-week marking period, so
Yes.
that was why that jumped out at me, and I just wondered if there was any reason for it.
We can check on that. We can just table this item. It's not crucial that this gets approved today.
Okay.
We can table it, fix up the coding, like the color
Right.
coding stuff, and bring them both back at the next meeting if you guys would like.
Okay.
And
That's
just,
fine.
yeah, then I can
By Bruce
revisit
follow up
the
with
notes
the
about
committee.
what that was. I don't know off the top of my head.
Right, especially if it's not going forward. You know,
Right.
like if
It's
you
an odd
decided to do
one.
it to 2020 and going forward, it's gonna be last week, that's fine, but it is kind of,
That one, yeah, something
yeah,
happened,
that
I don't
outlier
know.
there.
And
Can-
then one other minor comment, and it's just more of an administrative thing, but if we were gonna approve it, I would just say that, the Memorial Day holiday isn't listed in the summary of all the dates on the 2019-2020.
Oh, yeah, okay.
And that's very minor, but I just
Right.
Oh,
thought
that's
I'd point
good.
that out. And then the other thing is just the wording, what we're calling that October day is different on the different calendars. Like on 2018-19, it's called Teacher Work Day, and then also the year after, but then on 2021, it's called Professional Learning. And I just thought it might be helpful if it has a consistent naming
that-
convention.
Those gave us the option, which way we were gonna do on which dates.
Uh-huh,
So at some point, they said like professional learning teacher workday.
uh-huh.
So then, as we plan ahead, we can do those dates instead of having them hard and fast.
Right,
We can clean
and
that
like,
But we can clean that up as
well,
we
and just
clean up
like
the
the
legend.
November date on the 2020-2021 is called Election Day, but on the other calendars, it's called Professional Learning.
Right, because November 2019 is not election day.
Oh, I
There's no-
see, I
there's no
see, okay.
election.
Okay, so that one makes sense then. Okay, so it's just more so than just, I
Yeah.
guess, I don't know if it makes a difference to teachers, whether it's a work day or a
Well,
professional
then
learning.
we give them their calendar separate than this one that has their days on it, because they have 190 days. But
Okay.
we can go back and fix those days and call them all the same
Once
thing.
we set the academic calendar, then we build the teacher
Teacher
calendar
calendar is a
around
different
that.
calendar.
So that's when it has to be determined for sure if something's a work day or professional learning or whatever is when we start setting that up.
So are they different things?
Yes.
Like you do different
Work
things on
day
those
is-
days?
Worked,
The activities are different.
And then-
They all count towards one
Right.
of their contract days though.
professional learning day will have like maybe an outside person guiding it, or you're doing curriculum work or whatever. And our work day, you're working on curriculum in the schoolhouse without more specific plans.
Or you
Okay.
might be doing grading.
You might be
or
doing
things like
grading.
that.
Yeah. Are they, is that determined this far in advance, or is it better to maybe call it, like on the calendar, call it both?
Right,
Like
we
That's
can,
probably what we'll do
slash.
actually.
I think that's what we've done in the past.
Okay. I
But
didn't
we're
know if it
also
was,
early, we're a little earlier out getting the
Okay.
calendars up to you.
yeah, I was just trying to understand if it was differentiating between two different types of days for
They-
teachers.
They are when
Yeah.
we do the teacher calendar, so
Okay,
they can begin to plan, principals can begin to plan, and we can here begin to plan what we're gonna do on what days.
okay. All right.
It was very impressive. It's like the thing in the Sunday comics where you have to compare the two pictures.
Back of the cereal
Yeah,
box.
that's
has
good.
it
Right.
on it too, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
The highlights magazine at the dentist office.
So, have we decided to table this, to clean it up? Can we make sure, please, Ishaki, that the minutes include a note about the calendar guidance that we discussed? Which I guess you
I
can
can just
listen to
let you take
recording to figure out what
Picture
was
of my
What was
notes.
Take a
discussed.
picture of your notes and send it to me.
And if you see anything else, just email me. We'll try to get that done pretty soon, but if something else jumps out at you later, let us know, please.
It's that eyes crossing after you've looked at them for ever.
Move to table until the next regularly scheduled board meeting.
If there's no objection, then consider the item.
Alright.
We'll table the item. Okay. The next item is a discussion item for the employee grievance policy.
So David Adams is gonna come, share with you where we are with the project we've been working on of addressing our, employee grievance policy. David?
Thank you, Dr. Duty, board members. There's was a copy attached to the agenda for the board, and if you want to pull it up, it's just a quick little summary sheet, just to kind of give you an update of where we are and what our intended plans are. I'll go through this briefly, but in summary, the intention is to have the project work completed, policy documentation drafted, including the instructions as well as the overarching policy, so that the board could commence their review starting with the next board meeting in August, as well as a legal counsel opinion on it as well. So that's the intention of, that's our plans right now. So let me update you, real quickly on what has been done. So Eston Melton and the IT department have already set up a dedicated email address. It's called staffconcerns@csdecatur.net. It'll be available to our staff to report their concerns. And we will be providing instruction on what happens to emails or what happens to data that comes to that email address. In addition to that, currently the IT department has a staff portal pilot going on. I believe it's at Glenwood School, I believe is where it's being piloted at. But that essentially is a portal on our CSD Decatur webpage where staff members can log on through our page to a staff portal and get information about documentation or anything pertinent to staff members in the district. So on that particular page, there will be a link on there to a form that they will be able to fill out, and that will be able to be submitted to into the proper person to lift up concerns and grievances as well. I need to meet with Dr. Huddleston to make sure that what we're doing can also be used to facilitate Title IX reporting as well, so that we won't have two different processes out there. So this upcoming week or week after next, myself and the task force chair member, I don't know if you remember or not, but there was a task force that was formed, and we had kind of a cross-section of the district. Two of our members have since resigned or separated from the company, but still have a good representation of this classified and certified staff member group. But the task force chairman and I will be meeting next week to do the final draft and to come up with the instructions and to take into consideration some of the things that were lifted up. Some of the things that some of the staff members have lifted up as wanting to be included in a policy are really not policy items. They're really more along the lines of personality conflicts and conflict management and things like that, which we've quickly realized that we have an opportunity for some leadership and management training for our principals and directors and managers, which we will address. After we get through with the task force chair and I get through with the draft of the final draft policy, the committee had asked to review it or to be able to see it. We'll provide an opportunity for that to happen, and then it will come to you all in its final edited mode. I'll stop right there and see if you have any questions, and then I'll try to explain the bottom portion or the portion that's in green on the document.
And I'll clarify too, much of what we're talking about policy here probably will end up being administrative regulations under our new system, but some of it we may feel we want to incorporate like into superintendent limitations or ends policies or something like that, so.
So I have a clarifying question. When we've in the past talked about the grievance policy, we had two things. And one was a grievance policy, which I think is what this is about, which is the staff making complaints about people. And I think the other was the employee protection policy, is that right? Which is the...
I think we have two different policies based on whether you're certified or not certified, classified.
I thought it was more than that. I thought one was a way that an employee complains about something and
For the latter that you mentioned though,
So the current grievance policy, for the most part, addresses the process and protocols for a certified educator to file a grievance. It has statutes and limitations in there that we're supposed to follow by Georgia code, one of which is their right to have a hearing before the board, for example, if they so desire, and so forth and so on. Is that what you're referring to as a protection policy?
I thought there was one that we generally referred to as employee protection, which would be before we terminate an employee.
And that's the one that there's two different versions of.
That makes sense. So
There's
certified.
one that's the certified and one that's classified.
Okay.
That's correct.
And
Which that's the policy that really there's one version because of the opinion we got from our attorney about a year ago on the which brought up this whole thing, right? Of where exactly are there differences between certified and classified, and there aren't nearly as many as there used to be based on some of the changes to the law. So through our process of the policy governance, when we're putting in those pieces, they're probably going to be one policy, not two policies. But at the time the policies were drafted, the certified employees had different protections than the classified employees had.
I think one of the discussions we need to have and I thought we had had this previously, is that the board policy remains the board policy. Our attorneys informed us that we were providing more rights to our certified employees than we're required to provide. But the board has never expressed a desire to take those protections away.
That's correct.
Yeah, our intention is not to take the protections away in any way, but there is a portion of the policy that needs to be clarified, and that is because we are a charter district,
Right.
the educator's right to an appeal to the state level.
We can't provide that.
Correct.
It's out of
So
our
that's-
power.
So we've got
exactly where we
so we've
are.
got to take that out, and we have to provide some underpinning to help.
Okay. Okay, so we're all, it sounds like we're all in agreement on that.
Correct.
But it does, we do need to, all right, well, so that was one question.
Okay.
A related question is that, I think your task force made recommendations about changing, not just the grievance policy, but also the employee protection policy.
Well, I'm not quite sure I understand about what you mean by employee protection policy. I mean, there's not a per se protection policy. We have policies. We have a employee, for lack of a better way, employee rights policy.
Okay,
But are you wanting to have it detailed and documented to the extent that the superintendent can't terminate someone without it coming to the board, or, I mean?
oh, clearly
because
not.
there's-
That's not it.
there-
It's
that's-
that
that
we
would be
had, no, there are two policies, and I'm sorry, I just don't remember the letter code for each one, but I
So
know that,
And I can tell you, I just pulled it up. It
Good.
would be helpful.
Yeah.
So policy GAE is the complaints and grievances policy.
Right.
And policy GAEA is the staff protection policy. And so I think those are the ones that you're referring to.
yes,
Yep. And so those are the ones that, and then GAAA is the equal opportunity employment. No, that's not the one. Hold on. The one that references the Georgia code that doesn't apply because we're a charter district. Let me find it real quick.
That's loosely referred to as fair dismissal.
Right.
Is what.
Right,
is what's-
That's the one that we are implementing the policy as the law is written for all of the pieces that we have control over.
Right.
Which is what David was referring to.
Right.
We can't give them a hearing before the state board, but we can do everything up to that point.
so the reason for my question is that, when this was discussed, I think a year ago, we were discussing changes to GAE and GAEA as separate things. I don't think that we ever finished our work on either of them. I think that we were presented with a proposal that, wasn't ready for whatever,
We presented the suggestions and findings of the
right,
task force. That included, one of the things it did include that we have since learned that we can't do is to have there are certain provisions for a certified educator that we have to carve out that are separate from a classified individual. And we intend to do that in the policy makeup that we submit. The other thing was that the primary concern with the task force was some reassurance that if they lift up a concern or lift up something that's, the primary concern was if they have issues with their immediate supervisor. That
Right.
was the paramount concern that came up constantly in the task force meetings. And so trying to explain that exact process, how that process will work through in detail when a complaint's lifted up about someone's supervisor.
And that's why you see the focus in his presentation on how people can report. And
Right.
are there anonymous ways to report where that's possible? Like, that's where a lot of the task force's concerns were about, was that reporting piece. That it wasn't nearly as much about the dismissal piece of it, although that is a piece that we want to tackle. That's been more us wanting to tackle that piece than necessarily the task force wanting to tackle it.
so
There's also,
just to clarify then, what I'm trying to understand is the scope of the work that you're presenting about. And as I understand the presentation, it's focused on the grievance policy, GAE.
Mhm.
And that this is not focused on the GAEA
Correct.
staff protection policy.
That's
That's a
correct.
separate thing.
That's correct. because the GAEA piece is really the piece that we need to capture through our policy governance writing. Like the policies we're writing at the board level, that's where we need to capture that piece.
Okay, so GAEA, staff protection, we need board level input and guidance before the task force, so we shouldn't be expecting anything from the.
We can ask the task force for input on it if you'd like. We'd be happy to do that.
We actually have had some discussion closely aligned with that, although not directly aligned with it. The concern of the task force was that the leadership, directors, managers, and whatnot, really don't have a thorough understanding of the difference between coaching and counseling. When to appropriately coach and how to coach and how to document a coaching session. And that stems from the fact that, for example, in our classified service level employees, we don't have a consistent evaluation process in place, which we are working on putting that in place and actually hope to have that rolled out this fall for us to have it. But so there is an acknowledgement among the task force that there's some training that needs to take place around coaching and counseling and being consistent with evaluations and things of that nature. So when you talk about, and I've actually had a brief conversation with Dr. Furman about how some of that was handled in a much larger district and their grievance policy. When you talk about some of the feedback, for example, that came in from the task force was, especially from the educators that were represented on the task forces, that the timeliness of feedback from formatives and summatives weren't done in a manner so that that person could be afforded an opportunity to correct whatever the opportunity was. And so some of that is kind of, I think, encapsulated in staff protection, but it's more or less a procedural and a management opportunity.
Okay, and, I mean, I've got my question answered at this point. It has been on my own sort of personal work plan that we need to tackle the staff protection end of it as well, just as an FYI.
So
I do
just found
I do get
something
notes
we did.
from people about it from time to time, so.
I just found what we did in January 2017, so let me share that real quick. So the other policy is GBL. GBL is the one that refers to the Fair Dismissal Act.
Okay.
And we did put in a regulation, GBL R1, that says board policy GBL designates that termination, suspension, and non-renewal of employment for certain employee groups shall be handled in accordance with the provisions of the Georgia Fair Dismissal Act, and then it cites it, both as amended from time to time. In order to comply with said policy and other board policies referencing this act, the administrative team shall follow those provisions described in the Georgia Fair Dismissal Act over which the school district has control and authority. So we did document that decision.
That's good.
In January 2017, and it's right there with the board policies. So that's the other one that you're interested in.
Thank you. So I'm sorry I hijacked all the questions.
No, we certainly want to make sure the questions get answered. I mean, we want to make sure we're doing what's expected.
Anybody else? Go.
So for my part, it would be helpful to me if we could back up this presentation a little bit and
Okay.
sort of frame it for maybe all of the board members with some additional background information. I think that what's on the presentation sort of answers some logistical, tactical questions and doesn't really address some of the policy and process concerns that I have, or maybe not, concerns may be too strong of a word, questions might be a better
Okay.
word. And I wonder if it might be appropriate to do a work session on this where the staff could maybe answer questions for us like, what is our current policy and process for staff grievances? What is our current policy and process for staff protection? How much of that is governed by the law and therefore unchangeable by us? How much of that, what portion of that do we as a board influence? And then kind of like within, I think once we have that process and framework and some of those kind of basic questions answered, then I would be interested in hearing what has the task force or what has the staff what are people's concerns? What have we learned through the work that we've done so far that indicates what our staff concerns are with what the current process and policy is, so that we can try to address some of those concerns. But I feel like right now it's not helpful to me to just sort of you know, to know that we have a staff concerns email account set up and that we're gonna be kind of going through this process. I see you reporting on the process, but I'd like a little bit more visibility as to kind of what's happening so that we can make sure that what we're concerned about is being addressed. And I
Well,
just wonder if it might make sense to
Yeah.
back up and do this in
That-
more detail at a work
That
session.
would be helpful, because when you meet with the task force, you gotta keep in mind that it's a cross-section of
Sure.
different job families, there's different intellectual capabilities represented and different thought processes and whatnot. Most of the time, though, the things that come up that they're concerned with, depending on what level of an employee it is, has to do with the supervision and oversight, if they have problems with their supervisor. And for the most part, we don't, at the current time, we don't have a lot of issues with that. We have a process in place now. Certainly, that there's no one dismissed unless Dr. Duty knows it, and there's no one that, like, a director or principal can't recommend for dismissal unless I review the documentation. I'll give you an example. We did do some non-renewals this year, but the documentation was in place and reviewed and properly submitted, and everything was followed. But then we had at least one, if not two, where a principal wanted to do a non-renewal, but they had not submitted the documentation on a timely basis, and so they were not able to do that. So that person is still employed, but on a personal development plan. So the goal certainly is not to, we're not out trying to dismiss people. We're just trying to
Sure.
make sure that everything's structured and everyone's given the same consideration and benefit of the doubt.
And I think from our perspective, I'm not as concerned about, did we get their paperwork and check that box? It's kind of a bigger picture process question. And I don't think the board's trying to second guess any of these decisions, but just kind of, I think we just need to understand a little bit
I think
more,
that's a
and
great
kind
idea.
of backing up would be helpful.
I jotted down some notes of those questions that you thought would be helpful. I think that's a great idea.
Okay.
So would you rather, like, hold on this and back up and,
I don't want to stop the work that you guys are doing. I just think for purposes of keeping the board involved and informed, it would be helpful to kind of back it up and try to answer some of those questions. You guys keep doing what you're doing, I think. I don't think we want to slow anything down.
Yeah, I think this is aligned with what the board's gonna want to do in terms of, would support in terms of some practices anyway. So I don't think there's any need for us to stop. You're not gonna say, hey, we don't wanna wait for people to
Right.
report their grievances or
Right.
something. That's just, I don't see that
And
happening.
it might be helpful at this work session if we do it to bring Glenn Brock or someone like that who can maybe help, because I think a lot of these are also legal questions.
Right. Okay.
Or Deborah G. or someone who can kind of.
Excellent.
any other
So
questions?
yeah, so if it's okay with the board, we can save any other discussion of this for the work session, and we can
Sure.
bring some more of that information like what Annie raised up there.
I think that's a good suggestion.
Okay.
Right.
All right.
Thanks,
Is everybody good? All right, thank you. That brings us to
Property Tax Study Committee.
Property Tax Study Committee, which I understand has been very busy. I don't remember who's responsible for reporting on that.
We've been dueling out of town, but
Yeah.
despite that,
Yeah, so we managed to meet, and we have put together a summary just of basically outlining our mission and what we see as our challenges and the questions that we have and the data that we believe we need. And we provided that, we've copied the board. I sent, Garrett and I worked on that over the last month, and we finished it up and sent it to everyone today, so you may not have had a chance to review it yet, but we think that our next steps, it would be helpful to meet with Dr. Duty and with Susan Hurst to sit down and go over some of these questions and see which ones we feel we are capable of answering within, the resources that we have here at CSD, and then also discuss the process of whether to, and if so, how to bring in some additional resources to help us do the assessment that we feel probably needs to be done to understand both the impact of what we might be proposing, but also understand what options we might have that we may or may not be considering already. We've done a lot of reading on what other municipalities are doing, and also GSE, for example, has done a lot of studies on that and provided guidance and reporting on what the impacts have been. So they may be a good resource, and we haven't decided definitively that they are the ones, but we don't know of another one that is better at this point. So
Who did you mention?
Georgia State
GSU.
University, because they have a department that specializes in exactly what we are trying to do. So we've been mainly in an information gathering point, and we feel like we've been able to summarize it and really are going to meet, hopefully, to talk about what the next steps might be. So we'd love all of your comments and input once you have a chance to just read over our summary. If you have any thoughts on what direction you think it should take next. We'd like to stay ahead of the curve on this so that we have plenty of time to react to whatever findings we learn from working with any organization that might help us, and then also be out there in plenty of time to be able to facilitate what needs to be done through the community in terms of messaging and input sessions and that kind of thing.
Great.
Yeah.
So our takeaway is to read what I haven't seen yet and
Yes.
comment, right?
Yes, please. Right, and then
Can I-
Garrett and
And
I
I'll
will
find a
continue
time
to
for us to all meet.
That'd be great.
Can I give 2 comments, even though I've not read anything yet
Sure.
and you haven't? 2 unsolicited points of feedback. One is, I think that gentleman, Utz is his last name, David Utz maybe, who he's written some for Decatur-ish, and he seems to have a very good handle on how kind of taxes work in our digest and the senior exemption, and I think that he would love to help, and I think that would be a great resource to have, and he may do it for free. I'm not suggesting that we don't also use GSU, but I like being able to kind of tap into some of our at-home resources, and so he may be someone to potentially work with. And then, I know that everybody knows this, but I want to be as, I want to have sort of as much public input on this process as possible, and as much advertising on this issue as possible, because I sense and feel that there's gonna be some difficult decisions to be made in, 3 years' time? Are we about probably 3 years' time that we would have to vote on something, if not sooner than that? And I just don't want anyone to be surprised or caught off guard, and I do think too that this is where there's pros and cons to having board committees sometimes, and one of the criticisms of having board committees is that there's a tendency for board members to kind of work in isolation and privately and kind of behind closed doors on some things. Not that it's not allowed or you're doing it in private, but I think that we should be aware of that, and we should be very intentional and diligent about kind of counterbalancing that with an abundant amount of community input and public meetings on this.
I agree with that. At some point, I don't think it should be a committee. I think it was good to get this kick-started, but I think at this point, I also don't want to be responsible for the only, input into this process. So I think we should meet, with Dr. Duty and with Susan and pull together what our next steps are. But then I think the entire board should be providing input and comment. And then I think from there on, maybe it's not necessarily Garrett and I working on this, because I think it's valuable to have all of our input. And also at that point, if we do have a process by which we're working with an organization that can give us some professional advice, because we're talking about such a big decision that is financially impactful for both CSD but also for our taxpayers. I do think that at that point it should be pulled out of this committee.
I think that's a good idea.
Great.
Can I go back to one agenda item really fast?
Sure.
Sorry, quickly. On the employee grievance policy, I meant to add that since, David, I know that you and your team are gonna be moving forward with this without waiting on the board, but I do wanna make sure that as your team is working and advancing the ball, that we're thinking about this through an equity lens and asking how these decisions is impacting, or how race is impacting the decisions and the processes that we're making, much broader than Title IX, right? So, I just wanna make sure that that stays at the forefront. That seems to me an issue where we need to be, again, particularly intentional about
Agreed.
that.
Mhm.
Okay. Let's see, the next item on the agenda is any revisions or additions to the board work plan. And I think that's just an open call if there's something that need to be.
Yeah, so we can figure out, do we have a work session topic for August?
Well, I mean, I heard 2 work session topics, right? One, I don't know what's scheduled currently, but we need to schedule one for this grievance,
Right,
staff protection.
what was the other one?
But it sounded like we're gonna need a work session, but maybe not yet, related to
The property
the
tax?
property tax.
Not yet,
matter.
probably, I think,
Sometime later in the fall.
yeah.
I'll look at the chart here and figure out where we can fit the employee protection one as soon as possible. It might be able to go in next month.
Good.
I gotta,
I'm not aware that we've scheduled them out
I
that
don't
far,
think we
so I think
have.
we need to come up with another
Are we
chunk.
second Tuesday of next month, back to our regular schedule?
Yeah, what
for
happened to our
board meeting?
schedule, by the way?
We
We
didn't have,
started meeting in the 3rd week instead of the 2nd
I
week.
thought we had a meeting last week. Good thing I called
Yeah.
Lewis before I
That must
showed
have been
up.
somewhere, because I had that on my calendar
Yeah, it was
up
on my
until about a month ago, so it must have
I
been.
do remember one of the meetings changed. I wonder if it was that one that
Mhm.
changed
Okay.
after we
So
had set
next
the
week,
calendar.
next month is back to the
previously.
second, right?
For the most part, although some of them do change, you like,
Because of
you'll wanna look
vacations
at
or
that schedule. Because we do try to, because of the way like some of like fall break or something like that falls, sometimes they do get bumped a week. But
Okay.
I'll make sure we get the work session calendar, put together and we can start it off with this topic and then we can figure out what other topics we wanna cover.
Okay.
Okay.
I have a few things, just I wonder if they're captured here, because I don't see them and maybe I've missed them, but one of the things that I remember we were talking about, maybe discussing at this board meeting, but it didn't get added to the agenda, but I'd like to have it on the agenda perhaps for the next one, is just a recap on where we are with the safety plans, because I know that there was a lot of work that was gonna be done over the summer, and I think we were waiting to see where that ended up before we reevaluated the recommendations, or maybe we're also in the process of simultaneously reevaluating the recommendations that had come out of the last report from the outside consulting company, to see whether or not we wanted to bring them back in to
Yep.
do a refresher and also to
And
do
we
some
have- Noel has been
training.
working on that over the summer.
Yeah.
We can bring that update to August.
That
I'll
would
get that added.
be great. And were we planning to discuss, or did we need to decide as a board whether or not to rehire that company to come in and basically just do a refresher
Let
to
me touch
our
base with
plan?
Noel to see, because he's actually been working with them. They've just been
Mhm.
for free offering
Oh,
us some
okay.
advice and things.
Yeah.
And let me touch base with him to kind of see if we're ready. Right.
Okay,
And we
That
can
would be
then
great.
determine if we feel like we need to bring them in to do more, or if we feel
we
like
can do it
like
in-house.
it's sufficient. So,
yeah, okay. And then the other thing that I wondered if, I feel like we had talked about putting it into our work plan somewhere, but it was the Restorative Justice Initiative.
Thank you, that needs to be in here, because we talk a lot about it, but I'm not sure exactly.
As
What the
a
initiative
work
is.
session topic or as a agenda item?
I guess just making sure that we,
I feel like
Have-
we had it on the agenda at the last meeting,
right, we discussed it.
but it felt like there needed to be some,
So at the last meeting, I think it was the last meeting or one of them recently, we talked about where the restorative justice components were already present in the code of conduct.
Right.
Do you want to get into more details of like what those practices look like? Or what is,
I thought and I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
From the meeting last time, I was left with the feeling that we needed more work to ensure that this concept of restorative justice is implemented with fidelity
gotcha.
throughout the system, and that we've got practices and procedures and structures in place to ensure that it's done.
Gotcha.
And that-
Right,
So that might be kind of a discussion item at a future regular meeting where we can present how we're actually implementing that on the ground.
that would be great,
And we can talk about what
Yeah.
that's looking like.
yeah.
Okay.
And then the other thing, just a note, is I noticed that we're planning, or it seems that we're planning on having a retreat in the fall, and the fall is already really busy, and so I'm wondering when we need to decide on dates for
Yeah,
that.
I remember
So-
there was one thing, yeah, on the thing, under retreat, it says schedule exclamation point.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
we didn't follow our own
Exclamation point?
exclamation
Should have
point.
had 2 exclamation points.
I can look at some potential dates and send down a doodle poll, and
Okay.
we can see where we
That's
are
good.
with
That'd be great.
Would that be just the all-day one, or the overnight
all-day
one, or
one.
just the one day? all
just
day?
the one day.
There is no overnight
Do we
one.
do an overnight one? Oh,
It's crazy.
why am I thinking there was an overnight?
There is one that we do 2 days. We
Oh,
just
you
don't spend the
come
night.
back. That's
Yeah.
right, you come back.
I mean, traditionally, our retreat has been a Saturday, Sunday affair.
Yes,
That's right. I don't know why I was thinking it was overnight.
I'll look at some potential.
The rest
dates
of us
and
do
stuff.
overnight, we just don't invite Lewis to that. He doesn't know.
That's
He
what
doesn't know about that part of it.
Awkward.
And I'm wondering too, and this is just a suggestion for the doodle poll, like, could we do it where maybe it's not the entire weekend, but maybe it's one day on one weekend, and then, like, if you did it a Sunday one weekend and the Sunday the next weekend, or a Sunday and then a Saturday, because sometimes it's difficult to get away the entire weekend.
Okay.
If we needed to do 2
I'll
days.
send down a variety of dates and we
Okay.
can see kind of what
Okay,
that looks
That's
like.
ballsy.
that'd be great. Thank you. That's all I have.
I have 2 questions on this. Help remind me where the context is for you, Dr. Duty, your reporting calendar for when you report on things to the board. That's different from the calendar that we have for the board work plan, correct?
Hopefully, eventually, they'll be very similar.
Okay.
And they'll be aligned to each other, but
Okay.
right now, that's one of the pieces of like the board policy manual is the calendar you're talking about.
Yeah,
That we haven't really finalized yet, so
Okay.
right now, we're operating off of this calendar right here.
okay. So, the thing that comes to my mind, and I think we probably have a couple of things that we can talk about later, but, in addition to restorative justice, but the Spanish program, and that was something that we got some comments on this morning at our Taxpayer Bill of Rights hearing, and I've been getting a lot of increased questions about what type of monitoring are we doing to ensure that the Spanish program is maintaining integrity despite the reduction in minutes, and with additional changes potentially being made to that. I don't wanna be a broken record on it, but I wanna make sure that we're getting some reporting on,
Okay.
and figuring out what type of metrics we're using to measure our progress.
Okay,
So, for what it's worth, the work plan is sort of like initiatives that we're aware of something and we're sort of, these are things that we need to tackle as a board. And it should align with the quarterly, or not quarterly, but regular reporting under the policy governance. But policy governance, the calendar is a little bit different in that it is a regular report to make sure that even if it's not a particular initiative, we're gonna get a report from David
Right.
on this and that aspect of the operation.
yep.
So they're similar, but they're a little bit different.
There may be some like ad hoc reports for
Right.
specific issues that come up that aren't covered under the normal annual calendar.
FYI. Okay, we have future business, but I kinda feel like that's the same as the board work plan.
Yeah, the future business is just some dates, that you might wanna be aware of, meet and greets and some things like that, so.
Meet and greet.
Meet and greets for each grade level,
I
when
see.
they go to their schools to do
Okay.
their meet and greet. The opening day ceremony, July 30th, the morning of July 30th, sometimes board members come to that,
Oh, I can't do that.
so.
I'm gonna miss that. I'm sorry. Okay. If there is no further business for the regular meeting, we do have a need for an executive session to discuss personnel, property, and legal. Do we have a motion to go into executive session?
So, seconded.
All in favor?
Aye.
Chair votes aye, so we'll
7:30.
adjourn this meeting and go into executive session. I don't think we expect any action to be taken at the executive session, so there'll be no further public, although you're welcome to stay if you want.
I'd
Thanks,
just like to
everybody.
note we completed that meeting in 1 hour.
That was pretty good.
All right.
Score. Drop